well, good. So terrestrials today, a little bit how to fish them. Before that, I'm gonna give a little ecology lecture. So that's kind of the bulk of the talk is going to be that. So some of this is already taken care of, but I did my PhD in stream ecology at West Virginia University some time ago. I teach at UW La Crosse. Because I need more stuff to do, I'm also Cooley Region chapter president. 1 year in, a couple more to go, not that I'm counting. Oh, I mean, yeah, it's been good. If you are so interested, there is a blog that I've been writing about every other week. So this last week was neonicotinoids. I finally got around to finishing. Tends to be scientific topics and fishing topics and a little mix of that. And then I've been a scientist and fished for, oh God, over 30 years now, which is kind of hard to believe. So I'm going to give you a little crash course in stream ecology. We're going to talk about this idea of reciprocal prey subsidies. Talk a little bit about insect populations and kind of what's going on with them. And then fishing terrestrials, kind of the what, when, where, and hows a little bit. So anyone familiar with the river continuum concept? Kind of a place to get started in stream ecology. It basically just says as we move from the headwaters downstream, we get these predictable physical changes where the energy sources come from changes. So in the headwaters, it tends to be, again, this is from kind of a mountainous area, tends to be mostly leaf fall that provides most of the energy. And then as we move down farther, more light hits the stream, we get in-stream production instead. So all of the aquatic vegetation I saw today while I was out fishing. And then you get kind of that slime on rocks, right? All that periphyton that grows as well. That is then food for these insects. And we have these different insect groups, collectors and grazers and shredders that all have sort of different things that they do to turn primary production into what we call secondary production or fish food. And of course, as we adapt this to the Midwest, it's a different topography, and it is certainly a much more agricultural landscape than, where it was devised from. So a couple of terms I'm going to use, kind of big, you can impress your friends and neighbors with: autochthonous and allochthonous, which is just a big fancy word for auto is self, so production that happens in the stream. So rooted macrophytes, so that's just rooted vegetation, periphyton. There's some phytoplankton. And what's sort of interesting about these, because they don't have to hold themselves up, they're rather nutritious. That is, they have relatively low carbon, which is what plants use to hold themselves up, and higher nitrogen, which makes them more nutritious. Whereas our terrestrial plants, so we get a lot of matter from leaf fall, from sediment delivery, they've got a relatively high carbon to nitrogen ratio because they've got a lot of cellulose. It's the thing that holds them up. And lignins and some other things, but largely cellulose. So, our sort of expectations based on that model should be sort of this forested headwaters. But like I'm here in Minnesota, I fished over the South Fork of the South branch of the route. I don't know what, or a whitewater. Sorry, I don't know your streams yet. I bought a license for the first time this year, so I'm going to figure them out. And I have John's book that's going to guide me, and trout routes and all that good stuff. So I'm gonna, yeah. So my cost to this, tell me, like, you catch me after the meeting. What are the places in Minnesota I have to go see? Like, I've kind of got my list for Wisconsin, the places that, if you're going to go there, you kind of got to go see them. Catch me afterwards and let me know, like, I got to go to Lanesboro. It's one of the things I've heard already. And if you have places like that, let me know. And I will do my best to explore. So this importance of terrestrials to trout, we have this idea we call reciprocal prey subsidies. It basically means that during times of the year, and I'll talk about this with some figures, that aquatic insects feed a lot of the birds and the spiders and stuff, right? So this time of the year, we're getting a lot of hatches. These aquatic insects are becoming bird food and bat food and spider food and all these things. But then by the middle of summer, we're getting a lot more terrestrial inputs, grasshoppers and beetles and ants and all those kind of things. So I'll kind of talk through all of these things here in slides. So this is that reciprocal prey subsidy idea. And again, that here our fish are feeding on these aquatic insects, but they're also feeding on these terrestrial invertebrates that are falling in. And when those things happen, and I'll show you some figures that show this a lot better, are kind of seasonally dependent. Obviously not a whole lot of terrestrials in December, right? And they're kind of dependent on aquatic organisms at that time. Uh-oh. There we go. So for streams are alloctinous, so that is from outside coming in, are terrestrial insects. In terrestrial systems, it's aquatic insects moving from there. And then we have flood events, which also play a pretty big role, bringing in nutrients and also depositing nutrients from the stream out onto the landscape. There we go. So this, I started talking to Bob about what, he was kind of interested in, and this was some really cool stuff. This is in Japan. So Kurt Fausch, who I don't know if anyone would know Kurt Fausch, but he wrote a really cool book for the love of rivers. And some of the stuff that kind of got him interested in this was a researcher in Japan I'll talk about here in a second. One of the things they did is to test this is they cut off that flow of material in either direction, right? So aquatic insects can't get out, terrestrial insects can't get in. They saw what and tried to see what the effects of that were. So here is Nakano. This is this is a slide I stole from, unfortunately, the obituary thing written for him in ecological research. He died out on the Sea of Cortez in a boat accident, way, way too young, but just a kind of a brilliant mind, did some really amazing stuff in Japan and worked with scientists from around the world and particularly here in the United States. Oops. Now go for it. One more. I'll let you. So this is the kind of the big take-home message. So talking about reciprocal prey subsidies. So by the way, the blog I wrote, this is the first thing I ever wrote about was reciprocal prey subsidies, because it's kind of an idea I've just always found really cool. And it's that terrestrial prey are feeding our non-native rainbow trout in their case, their white-spotted char, their salmon, Dolly Varden are native there. And then kind of a fish near and dear to my heart, we have a project that's going on this summer, are the sculpin, which are a real benthic fish. That is, if you're familiar with sculpin, they have no swim bladder. They're on the bottom of the stream. So they're eating almost no terrestrial insects, but eating, aquatic prey, whereas like rainbow trout are eating just a lot of everything. And then on the terrestrial side of things, all these different bird species and kind of how differently dependent they are on aquatic prey sources compared to the terrestrial food that's otherwise in their homes.
I'm sorry, I know we're supposed to hold our questions to
Nope.
the end, but the thickness of those lines is how much of it feeds?
Yeah, the thickness is how much of it is going from that source to that species.
So rainbows eat a ton of terrestrials and sculpins eat none.
And sculpins eat pretty much none. Yep, exactly. And kind of the big thing here that they were interested in, of course, is rainbow trout, like kind of largemouth bass, are two of the species that have been most widely moved all over the world. And rainbow trout, obviously, when they're eating that much, they're having an effect on these native species. Kind of another big topic to talk a little bit about is if you talk about stream fishes, there's always this fish bioenergetics thing. It's essentially an energy balance equation that says what goes in goes out or gets put into growth, right? And depending on water temperature, because these are cold-blooded organisms, how much they put into this respiration part, so SDA and SMR, not going to get into them too much, depends on the water temperature. What they have left, some of it gets put into reproduction, but whatever is kind of left over goes into growth, right? So they can increase in length, which increases their weight. So it's all about kind of how fishes allocate that energy. And as we look at this at different temperatures, we see that there's sort of this aerobic scope. So that is essentially at different temperatures, they have different abilities to assimilate what it is they eat. They're unlike us, who has a constant body temperature, our digestion is always sort of the same. Theirs is temperature dependent. And what's always kind of cool with these things, and I'm going to try to see if that works. Yep. So this optimal temperature is often fairly close to this critical temperature, which is critical is essentially you're there for too long, you die. But this optimal is kind of where you have the biggest cost benefit gain, right? The biggest difference between costs. So costs are the SMR, benefits are the metabolic rate, and that difference gives us our sort of optimal temperature. And as we know, for different fish, there are different temperatures. We know brook trout a little bit cooler, brown trout a little bit warmer. So kind of my talk on this is always carry a thermometer because these are data from Wisconsin. If you're familiar with the West Fork of the Kickapoo, it's kind of a place I do a lot of fishing, and but I don't fish there late in the summer because I kind of know that it's going to get really warm, right? So carry a thermometer, always a really good idea. North Fork Bad Axe, another one, right down below the horse. If you're familiar with the horseshoe down below Duck Egg, those of you who fish that, it gets pretty warm in the summer. I know we've caught bullheads electrofishing out there. So yeah. So stream temperature and light are variables in streams that are really important. And it gives us this seasonality of prey. So you can kind of see one of the cool things, first of all, panel A is the daily mean temperature of the forest versus the stream. And of course, air temperature changes a lot more than does stream temperature because specific heat and all that good physics stuff that you learned somewhere way back when. And kind of how much light they get, right? Streams tend to get a lot less light because the forest is blocking that light. And then kind of the ones that are really important, I think, are, so you'll notice this axis is terrestrial prey biomass. The other is the aquatic prey biomass. So we're kind of looking at the seasonality and how, so we'll notice that there's a lot less aquatic prey biomass during some times of the year. Like during the middle of summer, we don't get a lot of aquatic prey biomass, but we get a lot of terrestrial input. So this is for reference, and again, Japan, Northern Hemisphere. So June, but then July, August, September, really high terrestrial biomass coming in both of those, right? And we can kind of talk about this a little bit. Not all food is created equal. That some insects are more nutritious than other. Aquatic insects tend to be more nutritionally dense than the terrestrial ones. So it takes a little bit eating more terrestrial insects to kind of make the same amount of calories as if you will, right? And again, that goes back to what it is those insects are eating. And this is as best I could come up with sort of a joules per gram, so kind of related to calories. I forget the conversion between this and calories, but looking at sort of what things are really, really have a lot of energy in them. Kind of interesting. So adult insects, pretty high. Grasshoppers, really, really high in energy. But also the other factor in those bioenergetics models is how much of that is actually digestible by the trout, right? Because not everything you eat gets digested. We eat our fiber. We all know that, right? And so just more science for a little while. As the channel width gets wider, right, we kind of get this acid, sort of in these middle channel widths. So maybe between, 2 or 3 meters and 10 meters, we get kind of the most amount of terrestrials. And then as the stream gets wider, terrestrials make up less biomass because the stream is just bigger and larger, right? If you go out west, you fish along the banks because there's a fairly small bit of the stream that actually is getting terrestrial insects. Our streams tend to fall kind of on this side where terrestrials matter a lot. This is kind of a cool one. So this is from, God, I can't remember, France maybe. And they're looking at these different streams, and they basically find, this is the one we all care about, as trout get older and bigger, they eat more terrestrials. Right, so that's kind of the big, right, that as they get bigger, how many blue-wing olives would it take to eat to get one grasshopper's worth of food? So they're eating more terrestrials as they get larger. And at certain times, they're more, aquatic insects are more important. And other times of the year, terrestrial, so in this case, this was West Virginia. As a matter of fact, John Suika was my roommate in graduate school, so I know this study pretty well. Kyle Hartman was my master's advisor. And it's looking at, if you look at this shaded area is the aquatic insects, the open part are the terrestrial insects. And you can see that for a lot of these places, even in May, right? More terrestrial prey than aquatic prey. Again, there, a lot of it's big beetles. One big beetle, you have to eat a lot of tiny little mayflies to equal one big beetle. This was, it's off the screen here. This another friend of mine from West Virginia did this, and he was looking more specifically really at beetles in particular and kind of how much terrestrial. So terrestrial, the filled in dots. You'll see that for most of the year, outside of December and March, and these terrestrials were making up a bigger part of the diet than aquatic insects were. And kind of one last one, just kind of looking at different, breaking the spring, summer, and fall, kind of seeing that in the spring, they're eating a lot of benthics, so that is they're eating nymphs and stuff like that. The adult aquatics, the hatches happen in the spring, but you'll notice by the middle of summer, very little aquatic insects. By fall, we get a little bit of an uptick in aquatic insects, but big terrestrial still. Summer, look at how, did that again. Look at how big that terrestrial bar is. So fish terrestrials, that's kind of and then time of day matters a little bit too. I'm gonna skip through that one a little bit. And it kind of leads me, and this was a conversation I've had, a couple of times, even had it today once again, and it's just a huge topic, the insect apocalypse and why it matters. Kind of the thing that I've always thinking about driving around, how often are you cleaning your windshields compared to what you did 20 or 30 years ago? It just seems like there's a lot less bugs out there kind of everywhere. So the insect apocalypse was a paper, and this I thought was kind of the way to think about this really in a succinct way. It's kind of a death by 1,000 cuts. So it's not just neonicotinoids, but it's certainly neonics. It's not just deforestation and other agricultural stuff and invasive species and all these other things, but it's kind of all of those things happening together. It's probably the answer for why we're seeing some declines. And then here is, they broke out depending on, so they could figure out what the main associated causes with insect declines in different places were. You see on here, right, in intensive agriculture, pesticides, kind of the two big ones. You start adding up a few other, it's certainly agriculture is a huge part of it, but there's a bunch of other things out there as well. And I don't know if you guys get down to the Mississippi River at all, but I live within, I like to joke, I can see Minnesota from my front porch, to paraphrase Sarah Palin. And I can see a whole bunch of mayflies on my front porch some years, but boy, I tell you, not in recent years. Like we were just talking about this, a bunch of us ecology geeks, how we just haven't had a really good mayfly hatch on the Mississippi River in a number of years now. What's causing it? There's people looking at it, so I don't know that we know the answer to this yet, but certainly there was a bunch of variability, but we had some huge, right, we had the years where they were taking plows and clearing off the bridges and stuff like that, and we just aren't seeing that to that level anymore, which I think is the coolest thing on Earth, and I know not everyone agrees with that. And then kind of looking at the Midwest, we've seen kind of a decline in insect emergences as well, and Wisconsin in particular and Illinois kind of stand out as fairly significant declines there. You guys in Minnesota are doing a little bit better, I'm guessing, because you have so much more northerly area than Wisconsin does. It's kind of accumulated by area. Global changes. So looking, this isn't the case everywhere. There are places we're actually seeing small increases, but by and large, and especially if we're looking at this, some fairly significant reds and stuff in our area. So kind of to close that little part. So these insect declines, yeah, it's important, But, I don't think we really have answers quite yet. We're trying to figure out what it is that's causing these insect declines. But I know that it's something I've written about in a blog a time or two. I'm certainly seeing less hatches than I used to. Our sulfurs used to be the best hatch. We don't see them very often anymore. They kind of got replaced by crane flies. Crane flies haven't been very good the last year or two. So, scuds seem to be hanging on really well. So that always sends, so again, not an insect, but a crustacean. So that was kind of the science portion of today, and most of you are still awake, so I can move on to the fishing part. I just think it's a little fun to think about the science behind why terrestrials. And there is your picture with the grasshopper in the mouth, right? So red, I don't know why, it just works. I fish pink more than anything. Right, so my kind of experiences with this, that these declines are pretty hard to see because there's a ton of year-to-year variation. The really, really good years, so 2013, last year kind of sucked for terrestrials, or for hoppers in particular. But hoppers are kind of like they're the big ticket item. They're the thing we all get excited about. The ants and beetles are awesome too, but hoppers are kind of the big money thing. 2023 was probably the best hopper year I've ever had. I had a day, I think it was this day as a matter of fact, that fly is just eaten up because I caught about 50 fish on it in about 100 yards of stream. I just sat there and waited until they settled down again, cast back out, got another hit. I did that in an hour and a half, I caught about 50 fish. And if you tie a Moorish hopper with a little bit of super glue on it, it will hold together for just about ever. If the legs pull off, sometimes that doesn't even matter. And just like trout, it's all about habitat. Right, us to you folks kind of understand this. So ants and beetles are kind of everywhere. This is a great little terrestrial site. We got these grasses, and then we have these overhanging trees. So we get a couple of different sources of insects. I'm always looking for overhanging vegetation is kind of the key. So I know people that go out to, I'm sure you guys have these things here too, but Bohemian Valley to me is kind of like the stream that gets grazed exceedingly heavily. And I see people go out there and throw a big old hopper. It's like, what the hell is a hopper going to eat? And I mean, the cows can't find anything to eat. So I think crickets when I see bare ground. So when I go to Bohemian Valley, my first choice is usually a cricket instead. And then grasshoppers, of course, well, grass, right? Yeah. And I'm not entirely, I'm still kind of figuring this out a little bit, but lots of rainfall early to grow a lot of grass, but not too much rainfall later to drown out the little nymphs because they have right, they look like hoppers the whole time. They just get bigger and bigger and bigger. But if we get rain too early, if we get rain when they're small, then we tend to have pretty poor years. This cool guy's a leaf hopper, by the way. This is kind of the jacid, however that's pronounced, from Pennsylvania, the thing with the little jungle cock nail. And this is kind of what that imitates in a way. There's huge diversity of these things as well. So to kind of talk about, so there are other things out there, but I'm going to talk mostly about kind of the big four. So ants, their order Hymenoptera, family Formicidae. They get that from formic acid is one of the things they create. One of my favorite little stories, and you can look this up online to make sure I'm not just lying, is that the Guadalupe chapter of Trout Unlimited is or was the largest chapter of Trout Unlimited. They'd stocked the Guadalupe River with rainbow trout. They had a year, there was such a massive flying ant hatch that the fish that they ate basically ate themselves to death on ants because they died from the formic acid buildup in them. If you've ever anyone ever caught a flying ant hatch? No? Flying ants. So these brownish cinnamon ants, if you ever get a cinnamon ant flying hatch, it will be some of the best fishing you will ever have. I know people have caught it up on the Menominee River, so the border between Wisconsin and the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, smallmouth bass fishing. For smallmouth bass, it'll be some of the best fishing you will ever have. For fish love ants. I don't know, they get a high from it or something or what, I don't know, but they love ants. They're of course closely related to bees, also order Hymenoptera, as you might expect, right? That's social behavior that ants and bees share. There are about 22,000 species or a little bit more, which is a pretty darn huge diversity of them. And they're found all over the place, right? We find them in sidewalks, but we also, if you look around when you're out, if you kind of keep an eye out, you will see ants of all sizes, right? From size 22s or smaller up to some pretty good size 14s or larger. This stupid bionic ant thing is probably one of my, in pink. I have no idea why. Black works too, but pink seems to work just as well, and I can see it a little bit better. As I get older, seeing things better helps. But a little bit of wing so I can see it, and just a little bit of foam, and that little white indicator is really, again, helpful for me being able to see things. This thing works like crazy. Simple as can be, nice and easy. Oh, there it is. This is not the one that I thought it was. I was looking in there, like, where's the little, you've seen the one with the little beetle Matchbox car that's stuck in here, and I thought that was the photo I chose, but I didn't apparently. So beetles, Coleoptera is the family name, or is the order name. Tons and tons of families. As you've noticed so not quite all of these things are beetles. There's a few other things on there, I think. But so many of these things on here that are beetles, different sizes, right? Really short and stout, almost round, to big and kind of more elongate and all kinds of things. Saw some tiger beetles this weekend. They're always one of my favorite things in the world. I think they're so cool. Those little iridescent things you see in the sandy areas. Don't know that they're really trout food, but they're pretty cool. So sizes and shapes. This is the world's most diverse taxonomic group, and it is not even close. And if you sciencey folks, maybe Haldane, his inordinate fondness for beetles, talking about, so God must have an inordinate fondness for beetles because there are, as we know, at least 750,000 species of beetles. To put that in perspective, there are about 4,000 species of vertebrates like us. So they're incredibly, incredibly diverse. They go down to South America and insecticide trees, they find a new beetle species on a tree. I mean, it's kind of a huge, huge diversity. One of those we're not supposed to have here. Two things we're not supposed to have here. Let's say that. Japanese beetles. How many people fish Japanese beetle imitations? That bright green. They're really, one of the cool things about beetles is they can't fly worth the crap, right? They have those big elytra in the way, so that's a thing that guards their wings. This hard shell back thing, and they just kind of stick to the side, and yeah, they're not very good flyers. Like June bug season is coming up really soon, or probably kind of starting already. They run into everything as they can't fly very well, including the water. And they're everywhere. Huge diversity of sizes and shapes. So this is one, Ross Mueller's books. I don't know, you guys, had they ever made them to the side of the river at all? I don't know. So Ross, really neat guy, wrote two books, but the one in particular, he talks about some of his favorite patterns. This is the brown hackle peacock beetle. This is an older version for me because, again, eyesight thing. I put a little bit of white bright or something on the back of it now, or maybe even tie it in at the very back and then bring it up. So I have something to see it a little bit better. But it is literally brown hackle clipped and peacock, and then a little something over the back to make it look like a beetle. It does not look like much, but you can tie it down to 20s and 18s, and it really, really works. And then lastly is, well, it's not quite lastly. So the orthopterans, so this is crickets and grasshoppers. Yeah, pretty diverse, but only 20,000 species. These guys are probably hundreds of millions of years old, and they kind of break out into two groups as you might expect, the grasshoppers and then the crickets. This guy, by the way, kind of a cool little one that not all grasshoppers have very developed wings, right? That some of them are just kind of have these small little wing pads instead because they are not flying very far at all, if at all. So start with the cricket. This is, so again, woodlands, and I always think bare ground. Anywhere I'm seeing a lot of bare ground, I tend to see and hear, of course, quite a number of crickets. This is, for lack of a better name, I called it my cricket. I sort of, anyone knew Tom Wendelberg at all from kind of the Madison area in Wisconsin? Like, he was Wisconsin's ultimate fishing bum. I mean, the guy more or less lived in his car and stuff like that. And hell of a fly tire. And I modified his pattern a little bit, but that bullet head, so basically tie in the deer hair facing forward and pull it back. And then I added a little bit of foam because I like to be able to see my flies a little bit better. And this thing, it's probably as much a beetle as it is a cricket, but it floats really low in the water and it works really well. Those of you who go to the driftless angler and know Jerry Meyer, I always tie at least a half a dozen or a dozen for her every single year. And I tied them for the shop once and I figured out that I don't like commercial tying at all. So I just give Jerry a few because I don't think she sold most of them. She kept them anyways. So yeah. So, and then of course, a lot of these that we use for crickets are just kind of modified popper patterns and blacks and stuff like that. I always like this, my cricket, for this really slow water. And yeah, this is a spot that I say no longer exists because boy, has the stream ever changed a fair bit. And I don't know if you had the 2018 floods as well, or not as much as we did. I don't. This is Rulin's Coulee. Yeah, so this is Rulin's down where it dumps into Timber Coulee, and yeah, the stream's in a totally different place right now. This is also a place that I'm mad at because I lost one of my temperature loggers there because there was a cottonwood tree that had been there for at least 100 years, and I put a logger under it, and well, it fell last summer. So yeah. So I'm out about $150. Well, the university is, but yeah. Who am I going to sue? When I find that out, yeah. And I like crickets like when nothing else is working. And I'm kind of a dry fly snob. Like I'll fish nymphs, but it's, you got to be kind of desperate. And so before I get too desperate, I put on a cricket instead. And then grasshoppers, I think, are kind of like this. So evidence of how chewed up that same red hopper is. They're kind of the money maker. So there are not too terribly many. I use the Wisconsin because that's what I know and have the book. There are about 70 species in Wisconsin of grasshoppers. Huge diversity of sizes, habitats, colorations, right? We see the katydid kind of green ones to this red-legged hopper. So one of the reasons I add a lot of, or not a lot, but I try to add red to my hoppers is that the red-legged hopper is by far the most common species in Wisconsin. So a little bit of red somewhere tends to work pretty well. I think the red-legged hopper was the one in the very first photo as well, the intro slide. Oops. There we go. So what makes for a good hopper year as best I can figure out? Lots of grass, of course. So early rains, lack of floods, particularly from kind of mid-June into mid-August. That's kind of the critical time that when they're small, if they get flooded out, then you get a bad year. They like a lot of sun. They like, dried grasses. So the places I find the best hopper fishing are native prairie areas. So going to places where they've done prairie restorations. And I have a couple of those in my back pocket all the time. Like when we have a really good hopper year, there's a couple of places I make sure I go to because I know, like, it's those places where when you take a step and 100 hoppers are flying out every step, it's like, yeah, well, that's going to be a good spot. And then into the fall, basically until we get a really, really solid frost, there'll be hoppers around. And I may not, in September, I may not start fishing a hopper until 1 o'clock in the afternoon or something when the stream's warmed up a little bit, but there's a pretty good chance that they're moving around later in the day, earlier in the year, they're going to be moving around by, 10 a.m. maybe. Oops. So what makes for a good hopper spot? I'm kind of giving away a spot here if you know what you're doing. But this is a place where there's one of these prairie restorations, big, huge, wide buffers, lots of grasslands. They do grass, they do burns in there, and they keep the prairies going. So I look for big, wide, grassy buffer, relatively small streams, and if I don't find these areas, if I'm going to fish sort of the pasture areas, I'm looking for places that are rotationally grazed, not continuously grazed, because hoppers got to eat grasses too, and if the cows get them all, the hoppers don't. And then just a tiny bit, and I'll go through some of this kind of quickly maybe, but ants and beetles are kind of my first choice about this time of the year still, right? And then you guys familiar with the hippie stomper? That one made it this side of the river too. That's kind of my go-to fly. As a matter of fact, I started today with a hippie stomper with a little nymph dropper behind it, right? Hopper dropper kind of season is upon us. By midsummer, I'm kind of, it's a bit of a smorgasbord, certainly ants and beetles and crickets, and small little hoppers are working pretty well. As a matter of fact, I tie on probably my favorite fly ever to fish is the Hans Weilemann CDC and elk. If you guys are familiar with that fly, it's just a simple, absolute killer fly. And when hoppers are, when they're about a size 16 or so, a little caddis probably works pretty darn well to imitate a hopper. And of course, they get bigger as the season goes on. I might start really small with caddis. And here's, I think, probably the biggest thing in our streams is, I see people fishing hoppers that are 2 inches long, and it's like, find me one of those along, right? Kind of match the hatch. Look at what's along the stream, and we don't have those hoppers here, at least not in any number. So I would say that very rarely am I fishing something more than 1.25 inches. So kind of 1 inch is usually about the sweet spot. And I don't remember what size Moorish cutter that is, but sort of the small and the medium, certainly not the big one. And then, of course, most of us start with hoppers, and they don't always work. And then I might switch to ants or beetles or crickets. And every once in a while, there is just a day where they're going to hit beetles and nothing else for whatever reason. Maybe they're seeing a bunch of them that I'm not seeing, but there are certainly those days. So different habitats, of course, too, is when I'm thinking habitats, a lot of times I'm thinking like the terrestrial vegetation, not so much the stream, right? Because they're not born from the stream, they're born from the grasses around it. So this is a place, right, I might put on a little beetle because I've got some little overhanging trees, but largely I'm probably going to start with a cricket or something. There's not a lot of grass left there. And probably just go with the hippie stomper because, that's what we do. Forested reaches, I'm thinking, right, obviously not big hoppers, but beetles, ants, and then kind of my second choice after that would be crickets, but I'm probably starting with a beetle or an ant. And I'm usually starting a little bit bigger with an ant and going smaller as I have to, because again, it's a hell of a lot easier to see a size 14 than it is to see a size 18 or 20. This kind of one of my favorite little places. This is a stream that you can pretty much jump across. And when you cast in there, they're under these undercut banks, and it's like a little shark, and his dorsal fin comes out of the water and he comes and hits your fly. And usually it's a fish no bigger than 12 inches. But when I'm catching a fish, basically a rod length or two away, 2 rod lengths away, it's a hell of a lot of fun. The challenge, and this hardly even this is the open spot in the stream, right? The challenge is actually hitting the stream. And then the second challenge is seeing that dorsal wake and actually waiting until it hits. And then, right, not all grasslands are created equal. So some of you probably recognize both of these places. I fish the Coon Creek watershed a lot because it's 12.2 miles from my house. Not that I've measured or anything. And lots and lots of hoppers and stuff in one, not so much in the other, because there's kind of not much there to eat. And then kind of the last thing to talk about, this is a stream even a little bit closer to La Crosse. It was really, really muddy, right? And sometimes something big and colorful and crazy. This exact fly, chubby Chernobyl in pink. I had a day on another stream that nobody was catching anything. We were trying streamers, we were trying everything. And I finally put this on and I had 2 decent brown trout to hand in 3 casts or something like that. Then I kind of slowed down, but yeah, they felt it on the water, right? I think they felt it hit and I could see it and they could too, and it worked. Last little thing is, I don't do this a ton, but I've been playing around with it a little bit more. Sinking terrestrials, especially if you're going to be fishing a dry and dropper. Why can't that dropper be a little sunken ant instead? This guy doesn't have much weight in it. It's just epoxy and thread. And I did really well on that last year. Just sort of sunken below, and it doesn't sink very far, right? Unlike the thing with the beads on it are going to kind of plummet. This just sunk a little bit below the surface, and I did pretty well behind hoppers and beetles with that last year. And then, of course, around the driftless here, if anyone has been, the Bad Axe Country Club, one of the great places on earth, right? Like if I was going to tell people that from Minnesota, you're coming over to fish Wisconsin, where do you have to go see? Unfortunately, Joe's no longer with us, but you got to go see the Bad Axe Country Club because it's quite the thing. This is Andrew Grillos tying the hippie stomper. It's like the perfect terrestrial for Wisconsin. It's fairly small, right? You can fish them in 16s and 18s is where I'm fishing most of the time. Sometimes a 14 if I wanted to float a nymph a little bit better, but most of the time I'm fishing things fairly small. And it's just a wonderful little pattern that it's got rubber. I love rubber legs. I think they're just one of the great things in the world. And super, super versatile. Is it a beetle? Is it what? I don't know, but it works. And then that's kind of my, kind of a fly. Actually, I have this fly box with me. So that was terrestrials in a nutshell. You guys.
Have you written a book yet that covers this? So I'm gonna
Get
get
him.
talking to you so the people online can hear as well. Yeah. Have you written a book yet that covers all of this?
No, but thescientificflyangler.com has, I've got, I don't know, at least a half a dozen terrestrial articles on it,
Okay.
including kind of my picks for patterns and stuff. And yeah, it's one of my favorite topics. I think,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
and I teach, so I just gave my last final 2:30 on Friday afternoon. So I've been kind of knee deep in it. So most of my fishing ends up being kind of from May 20th to August, whatever. So I get a lot more of the terrestrial fishing. I don't get to hit the hatches early in spring usually because I just don't have a heck of a lot of time. Plus our hatches have gone to crap.
So here's an observation. A couple years ago, we were fishing in Yellowstone, end of August, so heavy hopper season. Hopper dropper, weighted nymph below, bigger hopper. We were with a guide that particular day, and my friend Craig was fishing with the guide, and the guide ended up taking off Craig's weighted nymph and putting on a size 14 or 16 mayfly, dry fly behind the hopper. And Craig had a really good day, but it was equal fishing on the small dry fly and the big hopper, caught the same number. So my observation is that trout don't really like hoppers. They think it's like tofu. It's good for you, but they don't want to eat it. The mayflies are more like Dorito chips. They taste good. So that's my observation.
On that note, from a friend of mine, so Hans was telling me about how a friend of his was trying different mayflies. Blue-wing olives apparently are the most delicious of the mayflies, at least to the human palate. So I don't know.
Jason, I got a question. And I'm not sure my source, but you're talking about these epic mayfly hatches on the Mississippi and so forth. I thought I read someplace that some of those huge hatches had more to do with poor quality water. And the reason we're not seeing some of them now is some of that water is improving on that particular species is what they were talking about.
That is entirely possible. I don't know. This is one that I do know that essentially I think the same species. These are hexagena. They're mostly rigida, not limbata that we're used to in our streams. And the same in Lake Erie, they lost their mayfly hatches. There, all the papers are it was linked to pollution. And then when the lake cleaned up, Erie got their mayfly hatches back. So it could be a matter of extremes too, right?
Yeah. I'm no expert on it by any means, but I remember reading that. I think it was in that book that I talked about with you earlier that the professor from,
Clark Gary.
yeah, Clark Perry wrote about, the Kinney.
Yeah, I'd have to look into that. I'll give that a
And the
look.
other thing is for a layman like me, what's the difference other than color between a grasshopper and a cricket?
Well, they're in different families, actually different suborders. So taxonomically, they're closely related, but different, if that helps. We are closely related to chimpanzees, but actually we're more closely related than grasshoppers and crickets are because we're in the same order or we're in the same suborder.
That begs a question about different species, visual acuity, color perception, field of view. Can you tell us anything about that? Does
No.
it matter if we put a piece of corn on the end or?
I don't know. So hoppers, I think sometimes beetles too. Sometimes it's the feel on the water. Like I haven't done it much lately, but I know when I was first starting to learn to fly fish, one of the ways I was catching trout was basically casting a grasshopper at their tail, and they would react and turn around really quick and hit it before they had a chance to think about it. So yeah, the hopper I fish more than anything is a pink one probably. I don't know why pink works, but it does. Yeah, I don't know.
Are there cones? Mostly predominantly cones, rods?
Oh, I'm a little out of my depth here. They don't have great color vision. I know that. They do have color vision. We like the UV stuff that people use. My understanding is they lose UV sensitivity when they're about yay big or so. So I don't know that UV really, at least my understanding. There's some stuff out there. I'd have to read up on it a little bit. I know Jason Randall, I think, has a book on a little bit on what is it, what trout eat or something like that, that has a little bit of that in it. I haven't watched the video yet, but I saw something come on my YouTube feed about kind of colors and trout. I'll have to bone up on that.
Yeah, question for a Wisconsin guy. When you're making your grasshoppers, how much cream de mint do you add?
Don't have a bottle of that. And of course, I'm the odd Wisconsinite that thinks brandy is just like, why? Like, yeah, give me bourbon. Yeah, I don't want brandy. It's way too damn sweet.
And along those lines, Jace, is there any truth to the rumor that the Green Bay Packers are going to switch from green to pink?
Come on. I was good. I didn't make one Viking Super Bowl joke. So yeah, well, yeah. I've got a good friend of mine right next to me in the office. Every single year he's convinced that the Vikings, it's their year, and it's just kind of every year just to kind of watch him, like that whole thing just goes down, down, down by the end of the year. And yeah.
Are you gonna go again, Paul? I want to ask my question first. We had another low snow year. Does that impact terrestrial for the follow-on season at all?
You know, I don't know. I'm guessing that they do have to kind of overwinter, and having fairly mild winters is probably a good thing. But then you got the moisture. Yeah, I'd have to look into that a little bit more. That's a great question. I mean, I don't know how much of that, how many overwinter and all that. Yeah.
I was thinking of 2023.
Yeah.
Just to confirm, another observation, the smaller hopper is the ticket. You know, I fish a lot of size 14 pink hoppers. So,
Yeah, I'm very regularly a 14's about the size I don't know if I think it was on one of those things too. Little kind of a cool little thing I've been playing with. I've been tying my hoppers on a clink hammer hook and it gets the hook down in the water a little bit better. And I think I've seen my hookup rates go up just a little bit. Hoppers are one of those things kind of like poppers with smallmouth bass that I'm fairly convinced that they miss a lot. Like it's not just me pulling the hook out of their mouths, but it's them it's that too, but yeah.
Okay, so let's see if we have some questions online. So Chris, any people online have some questions?
Hey guys. Yeah, there's a couple of them here. Great presentation, by the way. This was really cool stuff. I was just on the Bad Axe River a couple weeks ago, so I love that area. Related to that, somebody's wondering how the water level is doing down there. I know it was a little low, but certainly fishable when I was down there at the beginning of May. Is it kind of the same?
We are low. Yeah, it has been sinking a little, not sinking. Not, we have been seeing a decrease in water levels. This is my plug for we did a really cool thing at I convinced the West Fork Sports Club to do a really cool thing. There's a stream gauge at the West Fork Sports Club now. So if you go to their website, it has air temperature, water temperature, stream level. You can look back a month, like the entire month, and it'll graph it for you and stuff like that. So that'll be a really cool thing for that area. So kind of in the Viroqua area, you'll have a pretty good idea how much rainfall fell last night because it'll show you it's got a tipping bucket and it'll show you the rainfall and stuff. So if you're interested in kind of getting down to that area, there's yeah, and it's a good couple inches lower than when I put it out 3-4 weeks ago. So yeah, our water levels have definitely been, we need this rain. I don't want a gully washer, but we need this rain.
Yeah, there you go.
West Fork Sports Club.
Okay. Another question here has to do with water chemistry and insects. Asking how important is dissolved carbon from dissolved carbonate rock in the driftless when looking at the food chain in streams? Is that something that you get into?
Yeah, so I do more on the fish side than the bug side, even though I end up always giving bug talks. So I had a grad student looking at, he's working for the DNR now, graduated, almost 2 years ago already. He was looking at sort of these sandstone streams north of the interstate. So for the interstate for us is I-90, which right between 90 and 94, that area. And the brook trout streams up there are all sandstone, very, very low carbonate. Down as you get down towards Viroqua, that area, we get into the dolostone, dolomite rock, and tons and tons of carbonate. Incredibly more productivity. Like we would go up to these streams when I shocked them with the DNR, and at 150 meters in a small stream, we might catch, a 20, 30 brook trout. You go down to these driftless, what I think of the more classical driftless stream, the dolostone streams, and we might catch, couple hundred in that same 150 meters. I was going to look for something I know was here. Yeah, here it is. This, if you can make this out, that yellow thing right there, this is before we figured out to put on something other than yellow. This is Brandon snorkeling. So this is Upper Seas Branch. He was snorkeling along, looking for where brook trout were laying or feeding, like whether they were resting or feeding. And then we put a little rock there so we could come back to it. And we measured all the habitat characteristics of that spot compared to the spots near it to kind of figure out, like, why is the trout here rather than somewhere else? And so that was his master's that I'm going to work at trying to get published this summer. But in these streams, it was kind of interesting because he came up to this place and, 40 trout is what he told me. And biggest was, whatever. Also, right near here, he spooked out a little brown or like brook trout. Sorry, these are all brook trout up there. A little brook trout about that big, and a 12-inch brook trout came from under the side and nailed it and ate it at about arm's length away. So you can see some pretty cool stuff if you get in the water and snorkel. The fish really, they put up with you a hell of a lot better than you would ever think.
Awesome. Another question here talking about wondering about presentation for terrestrials. Do you like a gentle presentation or I think they're referring to punching or hitting the water hard with that bug. What do you think?
Yeah, I experiment. That's certainly one of the things that there are days where, like on this really flat water, if you try to punch it down there, everything scatters. There are other days that's the meal ticket. So of course, kind of what is it? Do the least harm first. So I cast out a couple gently first and see if that works. And then if that doesn't work, I might punch one down and see if do they want to hear it? Essentially, do they want to feel that thing? Or they can feel a hopper hitting the water, right? That lateral line is pretty sensitive. And so it kind of depends on the day, but I will generally try both and see some days it's something that they really want.
Nice. Yeah, I've got here's one for me. I was on the Kinney last year and I saw these little green worms kind of rappelling down from
Yeah.
a bankside vegetation. I actually saw some trout coming up and kind of snapping at them. Do you know what those bugs are, or have you experienced that?
It's a what we'd call a green inchworm. It's a caterpillar. I believe it's a moth. Pennsylvania, it's a big thing. So the inchworm, and then what is it? The green weenie is a kind of a Pennsylvania fly that yeah, I didn't include that because I didn't want to get too far in the weeds. It's something I have a couple of just because you never know. But yeah, and it's a fairly bright green. They're kind of
Yeah, they're super bright green.
yeah, it's worth carrying one or two or three or four or whatever.
Green weenie.
Green weenie is a Pennsylvania fly. That one I think sinks a little bit more. It's not such a great floater, but a lot of the ones I see, the pattern's just basically deer hair that you tie as a kind of a caterpillar and floats well enough. Foam would work too.
All right. Here I got one last question online. This is the interesting one. Do you have any sense of how many 24 plus inch trout might be caught in Vernon County area every year?
7.
7.
It's as good an answer as any. I have a good friend of mine who you should invite up here sometime to talk. He throws like 5-inch streamers and stuff like that, and go to the big water, especially before things get too terribly warm. And there are some really nice fish to be had in the driftless, but little streams like this, not a hell of a lot of them. But you get down into the bigger water. I'm really interested this summer. We're doing that Coon Creek Comprehensive Watershed Study. We have sites that we're going to shock basically within, like we're going to launch on the Mississippi River and head upstream in the boat to electrofish them. And it'll be interesting to see what we pick up down there. I think we'll pick up a few trout in addition to crappies and whatever else. And yeah. But those transition areas are where the big ones tend to be, right? So the Kickapoo River, which is a trout stream, but it's a fairly marginal trout stream, and you get down low on the Bad Axe and on Coon Creek and on any of those streams that are really big. Again, kind of do it early and late because by midsummer they're just surviving. Like I know we were talking about this not long ago and how that you'll find places where the fish have basically just kind of they were big and fat in the spring, and then by the middle of summer they get skinny, where most waters, and kind of the other way around, that summer's where they're putting on the weight. But those bigger streams, I think they're just trying to survive the summer to get to springs and falls when they're able to really put the weight on.
Okay, Chris, so we'll go back to the room. We have time for one more question. If anybody has a question?
It's a lot of pressure.
Well, okay, what about online? Do you have, was there a question in the room? Hold on. I'm going to give you the microphone.
I've heard some people say they fish crickets like real early in the season, and wonder what's your opinion on when you can start fishing them? How early?
You know, I've not so much, but I don't know why you can't. I mean, you certainly hear them out at night now, so they're around. Yeah, I just haven't tried it. I usually answer kind of what I think of as sort of the first thing that's moving. And then beetles are kind of next in line, and then crickets, then hoppers, but yeah, it's worth a try.